And here we go. Hello, guys, and welcome to the Uncensored Critic. My name is Oliver Gower. Welcome back to the podcast. So today I'm thrilled to be joined here by Simon Furness. Simon is an actor and director who's worked across countless areas in London. He's worked at the Actors Temple, GSA, the Mime Centre London, London School of Musical Theatre and the Actors Guild. And just to name a few of his many credits, he's played Horatio in Hamlet, Colonel Redfern in Look Back in Anger, and Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra, and Ernest Worthing in Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest. And that's just a few of his credits. And I'm sure, I mean, just reading that straight away, I know that today I wanted to talk to you about Chekhov, but I suppose just a quick note, sort of like an appetizer to the conversation, really, because it's very different. What was it like performing Oscar Wilde?
Oh, well, it was marvelous. I mean, when you get a great play and a great script, it does something to you in a way. It kind of carries you. You don't feel you're having to work in quite the same way as with a script that's possibly not at that level. I mean, we're talking about the kind of highest form of comedy here, really, where people are making jokes and they deliberately know they're being funny and they're meant to be funny. And that's quite difficult to do technically, but I was lucky to tour that in Germany, where then, and maybe it probably is now, there's a very high level of spoken English. And so this was a play that they kind of knew anyway, in a sense. I mean, I think it was quite familiar to them. So yeah, it was quite an interesting experience to have an audience, on your side and willing to kind of take part in it humorously, who were at the same time not English, for whom English was a second language. So yeah, I loved it. And also playing in wonderful theatres. In Germany, they have a very different system over there. I mean, every town, city has its own subsidized theatre. Very unlike our own situation,
Yeah, actually, I suppose that leads into a very nice area, really, which is, I suppose, really on a personal level for yourself. How have you found just the last 13 months without just no theatres? Well, some theatres have been back, like the Bridge was open for a little bit. The National was open for a little bit, both times, albeit very briefly.
Sure.
But everything else seemed to still stay in lockdown. Like the Old Vic didn't open up. Most theatres in town have still been closed since last March. I mean, what's your take on it? How have you found just a year without the theatres?
Well, I mean, I found it equally depressing, thrilling, depressing, and then in the way that all human beings have to adapt to whatever's thrown at them, really, or not, and I don't do that as well or any better than anybody else. I feel very deeply about it, though, because I think the theatre sector has taken a lot longer to get going, if in fact we can say what's happening now is getting going, than film and TV. And the British are lauded abroad for their excellence in this art form, and yet the reality is it's stumbling and floundering. And I don't think people are, perhaps the consumer of it is quite aware of what goes into making a piece of theatre and maintaining the buildings that can house it and create it. I suppose by the same token, people have started to become, even before lockdown, much more creative in the kind of spaces that they use. But for my own work, as you know, I'm an actor and a teacher, and so I've not been in a classroom to work, because I find teaching acting a very useful, important thing to do. It does support acting as well as I found that quite a strange thing. Teaching online is a very weird thing. I mean, here we are, you and I, relating over this thing called Zoom, and
this thing called Zoom.
This thing called Zoom. And acting, don't you find it's such a collaborative thing? A theatre is a collaborative thing. It's an interactive thing. It's weird. It's strange. I'm still coming to terms with it.
Yeah, I mean, just on a personal note, I am technically a GSA student at the moment, but I did.
Right.
I was there for a month. I was there for the whole of January, but I've deferred my place for the time being because it was all like this.
Right.
Every lesson, we didn't have access to the studio, and from first-hand experience, I can conclusively say that you can't learn to be an actor in your bedroom
Right.
from a computer screen. It's certainly not the same experience as actually being in the room and feeling the energy of the place and actually working off other people. It's chalk and cheese, the two.
Yeah.
The two
And the
things.
energy of the teacher too. I mean, you mentioned GSA. I have very happy memories of being there actually, and in particular a wonderful teacher whom everyone cites, I'm sure, been through GSA, was Ian Ricketts. And I remember that he is a wonderful teacher, and the enthusiasm and energy that comes from someone like that, I don't think is necessarily readily transferable to a medium like this. You know, I might be wrong, but sounds like you've had a particular experience and you're clear about how you feel about it. So
I'm just yearning for that reality to come, reality or normality to come back, and we can all just work on ourselves and just get back to where we be. And hopefully this will be the year that things start to change. So for that.
Yeah, me too. I hope so.
But of course, we can chat all day about that sort of thing and the politics behind it. But let's not get too much into that nowadays.
Okay.
But actually, I think it's a question I'll ask you a bit later on, actually, about in fact Chekhov's writing, being a social commentator or something like that. I wonder if he was alive, what would he make of this? But more of that later. So I suppose really to start at the beginning, really. What was your first encounter with Chekhov, and how, and I suppose, so that's the second part of the question. We'll start with that one. What was your first encounter with Chekhov?
Well, it was actually at GSA, funnily enough, because in those days I was on the postgraduate course then. That still exists. It was a year course, something like that.
Yeah, that's what
I remember we did when the scene work section of the course came round. The first scene I was given to act was a scene from Three Sisters, in which I was cast. It was players cast in those days as Ferapont, a sort of an ancient Russian serf, meaning a peasant who worked the land. Of course, I knew understood absolutely nothing of that kind of character and that way of life and what that meant historically or anything or humanly, and so I blundered my way through it. He doesn't have much to say, but of course that was an acting lesson in itself, because it's what happens around the lines, if you like, that were really is really important. But I was struck by the fact that Chekhov was a writer who didn't seem to have, even though I felt this, who didn't seem to have a thesis or an agenda to push, if that's the right verb, on his audience. Unlike, say, Ibsen, for example, or Strindberg, they're very different writers, to quote other 19th century writers. He seemed to have this extraordinary capacity. I felt it in that scene. Ferapont has this extraordinary speech about pancakes and Moscow, and what the heck has this got to do with anything? But then I've realized subsequently that people talk in this rambling, disconnected, disjointed way without any sense of what's been before, what's happening now. And he's revolutionary, and I think still is, really, as a writer who can capture that sense of reality unfolding in a lived in moment by moment way,
Yeah, very, very authentic and very kind of true to life, and very slice of life. So I suppose, and the second part of the question is, from that first experience and everything you've encountered with Chekhov until this very day, what on a personal level, what does it mean to you? What does Chekhov really strike you on a personal note?
Oh, well, he's the great poet of failure. If anyone's an actor or a writer or creative in this island, they'll know what that means. And I don't say that despairingly, by the way. Chekhov's characters try, and they may make a little effort, but he kind of, if he's saying anything at all, and he doesn't really say much to us in terms of being someone with a message, it seems to be, to me at least, it's okay to be fragile, it's okay to be vulnerable, to fail, but it's not okay not to try, even a little bit. If you think about Three Sisters, those three women want to get to Moscow. Why? To make a better life for themselves. At the end of Uncle Vanya, Sonia says, we will live through days and nights, but we will rest. There's always a sense in Chekhov that life can be and will be better than it is now, which, if that is a message, I think that, that's very important to me personally. And also, I think he feels beauty very deeply. You can't. I don't think you can really apprehend Chekhov in quite the way that you apprehend other playwrights. It's a bit like the mood that music induces in you, or a painting. That's my feeling about him, and he's quite rare like that. I think that's quite an unusual experience to have of a playwright in the theatre, or which is where he kind of worked principally. So yeah, I suppose it's beauty and transience and failure. Those are the things which, but out of failure, the renewed effort to try again.
Yeah.
Which I think is a great theme anyway in all art, really.
Yeah, he strikes me as a very kind of yin-yang kind of writer in a way. He's very, there is a lot of darkness, but yet there is light in there as well.
Yeah, most definitely. And he doesn't seem to, I mean, we don't live our life in scenes or acts, and we don't live our life like it's a play. We just kind of go from one thing to the next, don't we? With more or less consciousness of that. And Chekhov presents life in that way, I think. There's not a, I mean, one has to remember also he was reacting or writing in a very different way to the kind of things that were being performed in the state-run theatres of his day. They were used to seeing melodramas and farces and vaudevilles and pretty average stuff, if I'm honest with you, by all accounts. And so I'm being kind, but where when he came along, he was really writing in a different way. And one has to remember also, of course, I think that he was a short story writer as well, and a very prolific one. And so he came to the theatre, on the back of a lot of journalism and short story writing. And I think if he hadn't written a single play, he'd be remembered as being a wonderful short story writer.
Wow. That's impressive. I mean, I've often just, we're just hearing what you're talking about there about beauty and how there seems to be like a generation of faith or something like that. I think like as Sonia at the end of Uncle Vanya has that speech, which we'll come on to a bit later, saying that we will rest, it seems to be, and I think she also says God will smile on us as well.
Yes, that's right.
And so I was often curious about how, would you say that Chekhov was a man of faith? Was he a man of God? Did he have that edge about him? Did he have a faith?
I would say that first and foremost, he was a doctor, which is a rather strange answer to your question. But I think being a doctor, being a medical man, gave him a certain sense of objective detachment from people's drives and whims and attachments. I mean, there are people who are overtly religious in Chekhov in the sense of believing in a god, like Marina, for example, in Uncle Vanya. She's very much of the peasant class who has a respect and a worldview for the Almighty and the Eternal, and that everything we do happens under the eye of an almighty eternal force. Whether or not he subscribes to that, I don't get that impression. I don't really feel that he is somebody who subscribes to any political or firmly held religious notion. I think he's got a gentle tenderness towards human folly and wisdom and greatness. He doesn't judge people. I think he accepts them in a way. And if that's spiritual, which probably it is, rather than religious, then one could say he is that, But as for being orthodox, I mean, he was raised, I think, in quite a strict religious way, if I remember rightly, because he came from humble origins. I think he's the son of a grocer, a greengrocer or something. He came from very humble origins. He wasn't born aristocratically, and he wasn't born into the theatre or anything like an arts life. He didn't have those antecedents. So yeah, I mean, there's a pervading sense of the universe in his work, in the sense of a force, of an energy, but I don't get the impression there's anything specifically religious about him in his writing. He has a very encompassing view. He doesn't judge people who are, but I don't think he's somebody who signs up to any or subscribes to any special religious notion, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's fascinating to know, because it seems like with his work and even with his life, there's a balance between, do we trust, do we just listen to the science, or do we have faith as well? Is there something that science can't explain? And I think, to me I've, unfortunately, I never knew the man. None of us of our generation did. But there seems to be. I get an image of somebody who has this ability who knows on the surface that there is, with the science, that there is fact and there is a reason why everything happens because of the body's natural processes or nature's processes or the universe, whatever it is. And yet at the same time, he looks at that and he recognizes that there are things that are out of our control, etc. And so is there another force at play here as well? Because obviously I could be getting this completely wrong, but that's something which I think is quite interesting, that it's like a man who can't decide whether he trusts the facts or whether there is something else which we're not privy to. So he's not one way or the other. He's open to both possibilities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's accurate. I mean, it sounds like we're talking about someone who couldn't make his mind up here, but
pretty much.
I don't think that's the case. Well, to go back to the medical thing again, I think he had an objectivity and a detachment, and there's always a doctor in his plays, and the doctor is can be in Astrov's case, Uncle Vanya, somewhat cynical and detached and cruel, possibly, about human life and even his own life. His point being, my own life doesn't matter, but it's what will come after is what matters. And even he can't explain the depression he feels at the beginning of the play, having lost a patient under morphine whom he was treating for spotted fever. And similarly politically too. I mean, Chekhov was writing and living at a time of great political ferment. We're not, Uncle Vanya's 1898, 1899, maybe a bit earlier than that, but we're some years off the first Russian Revolution in 1905. There is a sense of change, but you don't ever get the impression that he's overly interested in a sense of foregrounding it in his work. Unlike, say, Gorky, a contemporary of his, who you can tell has a very strong feeling about the lower orders, the lower classes, if you like, the working classes, and the need to somehow empower them and make them better, even though, of course, there's problems with that. But he was a committed communist in the way that Chekhov was neither social democrat nor czarist nor, So yeah, I don't know. Probably not answered your question very well.
No, I mean that's great. That's great. It's really interesting to have like the background to it and the forbearance of his choices. Really, I suppose that brings me on to something which we're going to talk about later, but I think it's quite appropriate now. Really, is even though we've talked about he didn't subscribe to afterlife, faith of science, political party, etc. He would have lived through the Russian Revolution from the early years of 1891 through to 1924. I believe I'm right in saying that, and he would have been around in 1861 for the emancipation of the serfs by Emperor Alexander II. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, 230 million people received liberty and essentially their civil rights. So they were able to maintain land. They were able to basically have rights and assert their political views. They could vote, etc. And of course, throughout the Russian Revolution, there came a number of very significant events, but one of them being Bloody Sunday in 1905, where Tsar Nicholas II and soldiers opened fire on a group of peaceful protesters outside his palace in Moscow. And I mean, I remember, and it's actually really refreshing because I studied this for my A-level history actually, so it's really nice to dip back into that actually. So at the time of, Russia in those years was full of complete civil unrest and loads of people, I can only imagine political speech here, political speech there, rally here, rally there, and then full-blown revolution in 1917. I've often wondered, even though Chekhov was on the fence of all this stuff, do you think he actually had a a relationship or a sympathy with the revolution in Russia, or did he sort of keep himself very much away from it? What do you?
Well, at the risk of of deflating your question completely, I think we should remember that Chekhov did actually die in 1904.
1904.
So Cherry Orchard was somewhat before. I mean, 1905 was the first revolution, and then the great one, if you like, the one that sort of rocked the world in 1917. Of course, he departed the scene long before then. But I think, having said that, though, it's very interesting. No, I think it's a very important point, because as you were talking about those events, one thing that struck me was, my God, how topical those events now seem to us today, just briefly, in terms of what's been going on in America and the protests and the aftermath, even in another way in this country, with police involvement and so on. Of course, Chekhov didn't live to see the Russian version of those in the early 20th century. But if you take a play like The Cherry Orchard, for example, that's a very interesting foreteller or forerunner of what's to come, because you remember at the end of the play, the cherry orchard, almost the last sound effect is the sound of the axes falling on the trees. And of course, one can read into that what one wants to, but it's no doubt about it, that orchard has been brought up by from the aristocratic classes, by the middle classes, who would in their time be liquidated entirely by Lenin in the Russian Revolution. They bought up the land, but they weren't able to keep it either. It was taken from them by force. So I think Chekhov has this sense of impending change. And even Uncle Vanya, the peasants arrived to discuss the land. You mentioned the emancipation of the serfs. I mean, yes, they were emancipated, but they had no money to pay for it. They had no money to buy the land that they were given. And so, things were in a state of transition. He's a great playwright of transition. We're still living in a police state. The Tsar is still very much in control. Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar, I think, when Chekhov was alive, was very reactionary and would remain so to the bitter end. So the emancipation thing was a bit of a blip, I think. It was a liberal blip, and then there was a reaction against that. I mean, look what's happened in America now. I mean, we had the Trump years, didn't we? And now we've got Joe Biden in, and it's how human society evolves. Who could have foretold the Trump explosion?
I'm still in shock even today.
Yeah, there you go. You see, so
yeah. Well, I do apologize to anyone watching, or any Chekhovians watching, for getting my dates wrong and thinking that he was living beyond 1904. So
no problem. I mean,
small flaw.
These things are all written down, aren't they? I suppose, but yeah, dates. But I think it's interesting. I mean, he was a far-sighted man, but I just don't think he was first and foremost a writer. And he wrote for money too. He was commercial, I mean, he had to write. He wrote because he had to support a family, and he also had to support his various philanthropic undertakings. I mean, he was an architect or a doctor. He built a hospital for the sick in Odessa, didn't charge a penny for it. Now, of course, we've, look at what's happening in the NHS. The forces of commerce are gathered around it. It's always a threat. In America, of course, there's no such thing as a National Health Service. But Chekhov felt that was the right thing to do. His sister was a nurse. You took people in who couldn't pay. You didn't charge them for it. Yeah. I probably better not go on too much, because I might drift off into some kind of diatribe. But
that's great. It's great. No, not at all. Not at all.
It's a very different way of looking at life, and I suppose he did have an intense feeling about people suffering. Obviously, I mean, how could he not? And where he was able to alleviate stress, he was constantly helping his family out. His letters are full of dealing with requests for money from this person or that person, and he was not an easy man to live with, I don't think, or be around. I mean, but he knew he knew that was the case. So his marriage was broke. His marriage to Olga Knipper, who was leading actress at the Moscow Art Theatre, was punctuated by long periods of absence. They spent long periods of time apart from each other because of her work and his. But that's possibly why their marriage survived. Also, he knew he was dying, and I think that lent him a certain detachment too.
Yeah, well, it's good to get all the context in and actually learn. I didn't know about the hospital, how he built that.
Yeah.
Hands and free admission, really.
for those and yes, I mean he was extraordinarily generous with his time and his money. Yeah.
I'm glad that his reputation is still celebrating to this day with acts of kindness like that, really. So that's fantastic. Cool. So without further ado, let's jump into the play, which we want to look at today. Of course, it's Vanya, which we've touched on a little bit already. It's a bit of background, and I will get my facts right this time. So the play was first published in 1898, and it was first produced in 1899 by the Moscow Art Theatre by a slightly well-known director known by Konstantin Stanislavski. I wonder what happened to him.
Yes.
And a quick rundown of the play now. So if anyone watching or listening hasn't seen the play and is keen to, then mute your audio or press pause, skip ahead, do it now. So you save the spoilers. So essentially, Uncle Vanya, the summary, is a play that dramatizes a rich couple visiting their rural home, and we begin to see the misfortunes of each character begin to unravel throughout the play. So you're going to have to help me with the pronunciation of the professor's names.
I'll do my best.
How do you say it?
I'll do my best. Which one is the name? Which
professor? Is it
Serebriakov?
Serebriakov.
Serebriakov. Yeah, I'm not sure if I've even got that correct myself, but that's. Yeah, I think that's correct. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, of course. Serebriakov.
Yeah, Serebriakov. Go on, while I'm looking.
Yeah, so Professor Serebriakov lives in the city. He has a rural home which is run by the rest of his family. Uncle Vanya is the owner of the estate. Vanya and local doctor fall for the professor's much younger, attractive second wife, Yelena, whom the doctor attempts to woo later in the play unsuccessfully. Sonia, who's the professor's daughter from his first marriage, is in love with the doctor, whose name is Mikhail. She is also envious of her stepmother's beauty. So we begin to see various misfortunes and jealousy and just basic flaws of each character begin to unravel over the course of 2.5 hours. The professor shows very little love for his family. He's very rarely in the house. In fact, we see him at the top of the play, and then towards the end where he attempts to sell the property, which brings me on to he announces plans to move to Finland with Yelena and sell the property because living in Russia has become too expensive. Tensions overflow, and then in amongst those tensions, Uncle Vanya attempts to shoot his brother-in-law, but fails. Later, Sonia and her grandmother, I think I'm getting this right. Is it Maria?
Maria Vasilyevna, isn't it?
Vasilyevna.
Yeah.
I'm trying to sound like I speak Russian, but it's just like discover that Vanya has been stealing morphine from the doctor and has had suicidal tendencies. But they make him perform a dramatic U-turn with his emotional and mental health, and his plan is foiled, and he ends up seeing life more on the brighter side of things. The professor and Yelena agree to keep the estate and let everything go on as normal. And in the play's conclusion, we have the family going about their everyday tasks, and Vanya is left complaining about how much work he has to do to please everybody, and the everyday toils and just things he has to do to keep everyone happy. But he realizes that no matter how much he does, he will never get nothing in return. And that's when Sonia, which I think this last scene in particular, which the production I wanted to actually talk about today was did you manage to catch the one at the Pinter Theatre?
Yeah, I did. I think it's actually still available on iPlayer.
It is, yes.
BBC iPlayer.
On iPlayer, we watched it yesterday. And and the last scene in particular is one of the most moving scenes I think I've ever experienced in theatre, which was Amy Lou Wood, who was in that production, with any of you remember from, she was in Sex Education. She did a fantastic job as Sonia. She reminds Vanya in this very emotional candlelit scene at the end that when they die, everything that they've been through has been worth it. And ultimately, she says, God, as we said earlier, God will smile on us. And her last 3 lines, I believe, are, we will rest, we will rest, we will rest. And so the play ends on a very faithful note that even though everything that's happened to them up to this point has been completely awful, there is still a chance for them later in life and of course beyond the grave. So my first impressions of the play was the play all happens inside one room. So it's a drama one room, and it's that typical uh, drama of everyone just batting off each other. And I suppose to begin really, it was very. I don't know if this was. It was directed by Ian Rickson, and it was a new adaptation by Conor McPherson. And I just wonder if Ian had actually had some sort of weird dream where he foresaw the coronavirus coming to the English shores, locking everything down, and all of us having to be contained in our houses, in our homes, with our family, our partners, or by ourselves, trapped on computers, etc. And I just thought that was it's a very apt play to be shown at that specific time, with all these characters just being colliding with each other all the time. And yeah, I mean, it really brought out a lot of the family dynamics in a way, which I thought was really really fascinating. Is there anything more you could say about the dynamics, the family dynamics of these characters in Uncle Vanya?
Well, I think you made a very good point there about it in terms of our own experience of being locked in and locked up and locked down. I mean, the play does take place, in a couple of rooms in what's really essentially a farmhouse, but really a Russian estate. It's very different to our own sort of stately home. It's not Downton Abbey, that's for sure. It's a rather rundown kind of Russian estate. But no, I think it's interesting in so many ways. It's typically Chekhovian in the way that no two people ever really meet on the same level. Rarely in Chekhov, and certainly Uncle Vanya, do two people really understand each other. There's always a misunderstanding. There's a superficial misunderstanding and a deeper misunderstanding. For example, you take the relationship between the professor Serebriakov and his wife, who's considerably younger than him, actually, Yelena Andreevna. Russian names are always confusing, aren't they? We've got that middle name, Andreevna, signifies that she is Yelena, daughter of Andrei. And then you've got the surname at the end. And of course, being a woman, she would have taken the professor's surname, Serebriakov, so she's Serebriakovna. It's that Russian way of looking at naming. But no, in terms to get back to the point, I mean, the relationships are what is crucial here, and certainly there's a misunderstanding on a very profound level between the professor and his young wife. I mean, she arrives in this rather unknown and rather alien environment where she can't seem to find a place. She's ostensibly the lady of the house, but nobody treats her as such. And she's walked into a world that is beginning to kind of fall apart because Vanya, he's called uncle, but not in the British or American way of an uncle. It's a term of affection, really. Judja, I think, is the Russian name for uncle. But she comes into an environment which is essentially falling apart. I mean, Vanya has paid off this historic debt, some 25,000 rubles on the estate, which he and his father purchased, and which is intended to be a dowry for Sonia, he finds himself without employment, really, because the debt's been paid off, and there's a lot of chaos. Things at work is not being done. Sonia is having to do the bulk of the work herself. There's also a retired or impoverished landowner called Telyagin who no longer has a place to live, but he's been taken in by the family in the same way that Anfisa, the nurse in Three Sisters. He's given shelter, but the remains of his estate's been absorbed into the Vanya estate, or the professor's estate. There's considerable turmoil. And of course, there's a storm brewing as well. And then when there's a big weather change in Chekhov, that always indicates turbulence and dissatisfaction. And when the storm erupts, of course, there are other human storms that follow, culminating in that tragic but ridiculous attempt by Vanya to shoot the professor, having discovered that finally, in his own view, the man is complete and total fraud, and what's more, he wishes to rob his niece of her patrimony, the estate. So yeah, I mean, it's a comedy of misunderstanding, really, and I think that's important to remember with Chekhov. I think English productions can sometimes, in my view only, of course, sometimes we are guilty perhaps of applying too much comedy or too much weighty tragedy, and I think, you know, we fall, so it falls somewhere in between. It's difficult to adjust to, I think. The Russian, we're not Russians, we can't pretend to be Russians, but at the same time there's a very distinct sensibility, you know, at work with Chekhov. But yeah, even back to relationships again, you know, Yelena and Vanya, they're both outsiders. You know, they both find themselves with nothing to do, and yet they don't really meet on the same level. She's intrigued by the doctor, who's another very mysterious figure, you know, who seems to have no romantic connections at all. Lives on his own in a very strange way in a forest without much human contact except the family that he comes to visit, Vanya's family, you know, and the professor whom he tries to treat unsuccessfully. Yeah, there's a lot of mismatching going on. I mean, Chekhov's supreme in that, I think. In The Seagull, everyone's in love with the wrong person, you know, and he's really interested in that, I think, and it's really well orchestrated.
I think I remember sort of encountering our three sisters at university and just sort of reading it, and I suppose I was aware of Chekhov, but I didn't really understand him at all. I remember reading it thinking, my God, everyone's so depressed, everyone's so dull, everyone's just really, who would go and watch something like this, honestly? But then I was lucky enough to be at a podcast recording November before last with Denise Goff and Jenna Russell and Derek Jacobi, and Jenna and Denise talked about their experience with Chekhov, and it astounded me when they said that Chekhov is funny. And I remember saying to them, I wish I'd said to them at the time, but I remember thinking, no, it's not. I mean, obviously I wasn't as involved with it, but they told us, they said to the audience, they went and saw Chekhov actually in Moscow, and they were astounded, they themselves were astounded about how much the audience laughed, how much they cried, how much they really engaged with the material. And there was this joy in the room as well. And it wasn't until I sort of went away, did a bit of research, and I think there's a nice comparison here, in a way, with Beckett and Pinter. And I spoke to Harry Burton, who was a friend and collaborator of Pinter as well, and we talked about how somehow there's something about the nature of life and how unpredictable and how untangible it can be. And, you know, we simply know we don't know what's around the corner, as Chekhov, as you said earlier, it's a moment by moment process. And sometimes I think it's a very British thing, but maybe a universal thing as well, that when we experience bad news, or we just having one of those days where things just, you know, everything that could possibly go wrong can just go wrong. And yet we don't get angry, we don't throw punches or anything, we just sit there and think, my God, could this day get any worse? And there's a laughter in that, and I think that's the genius of Chekhov. And actually, what makes it funny is the fact that sometimes people's lives can get to a point where there's so much against them, but yet there is humor in that oppression. Oppression. Does that make sense?
It does very much so. Actually, I was thinking about my own experience as we're talking about when I came on air, just to, you know, my troubles and difficulties with this technology. It kept coming and going in the middle of quite an important meeting, and I actually had that thought, could this get any worse? And I began to find myself smiling at it, and I think that yes, possibly in the past English productions have been maybe guilty, if that's the right word, of assuming that it's a very depressing, tragic process, and yet the comedy of a man in Uncle Vanya trying to seduce a woman, Vanya and Yelena, in a very inept fashion, you know, or trying to shoot the man whom he holds responsible for all of his woes and misfortunes, and failing to do so at point blank range, you know. I mean, yeah, he's pretty close, and he has more than one shot, and he can't do it. You know,
And
that's
yet you're laughing. How is that
yeah,
possible?
I know. How is that possible? And yeah, and finding humor in that too. And
Yeah.
you know, that's. I mean, I've seen a couple of productions of it in Russian actually.
Oh, yeah.
In the in Milan at the Piccolo Theatre years ago, I saw the Mali Drama Theatre of St. Petersburg perform, and also latterly a Romanian production actually here in London a few years ago. At the same time as an English production playing on the West End at the same time. It's very instructive to see the very marked differences between the two. I think Russian actors, and generalizing, have got a kind of preparation and a facility which perhaps because of our training education system and probably economically too, we are not set up to produce that kind of actor. But and that contributes to this sensation you have as well of awful things happening, but people experiencing the highs and the lows. You know, of people laugh and they smile. And in Russia as well, I think there's a lot of song and humming, and people are always humming and singing, and there's a lot of that going on. That's a very un-English thing to do. And I think that I remember that being a very marked feature of Russian productions of Chekhov I've seen. That people are singing and playing and they're involved in all kinds of activities like that. You don't see that so often in English productions. Though I would say Ian Rickson's one did bring out the humour, actually. So, I mean, Toby Jones was a very funny Vanya. That's, you know, he did bring out a lot of that hapless comedy, which he's excellent at, you know.
Yeah, especially the first scene, especially as well with between the doctor and again, I guess it's the grandmother of
oh yeah, Maria Vasilievna. Yeah.
What Simon said. Yeah, so between there's a lovely conversation between the two of them where I think I'll get the basics of it right. I'm not going to get it spot on, but he says to her something like, "Did you think?" It's something like, "Did you think I was handsome? I did once.
Yeah. Now you're old."
No, not so much.
Yeah, it's very blunt, isn't it? That's that first scene between Marina, the nurse, and Astrov, Mikhail Lvovich Astrov, the doctor. And it's a lovely scene because they're waiting for the professor and his entourage to turn up. And they're very late. Tea is, you know, it's second tea of the day, if you like. It should be at midday. It's now 2:00 in the afternoon and their timetable has been thrown out of sync. And so they're waiting. And while they're waiting, they talk, of course, in the way people do. And Astrov confides in her, doesn't he? And talks about how his life has changed. And he talks about this unfortunate death on the operating table. But your looks have changed. You're drinking too much. You know, that's the voice of the nurse. She comes out with this very salty, earthy, common sense wisdom. You know, she's not afraid to say that as well. You know? Yeah,
I'm just thinking that in terms of just in fact, what you just said there, in terms of, you know, you're not as handsome and you're drinking too much. I think there was a great lecture from a guy called again, I'm going to mispronounce his name. I'm so sorry, listening.
Go for it. Yeah.
You can tell Russian's not my thing.
Nor mine, sir. Don't worry. Do your best.
This was a lecture given by a gentleman called Andrei Malev Babel. I did my best. Who's an assistant professor of theatre at Florida State University, and he gave a lecture in October 2007 specifically on this play and Chekhov's history and his life. And at one point he said, quote, "Russian writers are social commentators." He wrote that inner freedom was more important than political or social freedom. And as Chekhov himself said once, he was trying to squeeze the slave out of himself. And so I think, it sort of ties into what we were talking about earlier with the emancipation of the serfs, and even though this was written long after that, I think, even though this is a family drama and everything, and is there still a hint of that social commentary kind of creeping in, because you've got a population who is dependent on drink, and you've got, despite the humor as we've talked about, there is actually a seriousness in their bodies, in their characters and things like that. Do you think that there is still that political and social political inequality that still exists, that's still creeping in despite the humor. So you've got comedy, which is serious, and seriousness, which is comedy, except from this angle, you look at it from the former, which is, even though this is funny, we can't escape the fact that this is serious. And this is why, because look at the political landscape which Chekhov was writing at the time.
Yeah, I think, well, comedy and tragedy in life are really inextricably linked, aren't they? And it's readers of plays and critics perhaps of them who like to parcel things up, or maybe it's the human condition. We like to know a tragedy is a tragedy and a comedy is a comedy, and yet that's not like how our lives are lived at all, at least not mine anyway. It's a mixture of high and low, and both really. But I think it's quite hard to make a case for Chekhov being a socially committed or socially oriented playwright. I mean, I think he's interested in the soul. That doesn't sound too highfalutin. I mean, you mentioned about inner emancipation there, and all of his characters are, I think, struggling with that. You know, I mean, you take a character like Yelena Andreevna. You know, she has the opportunity for freedom and adventure. It's offered to her, albeit in the form of an illicit relationship with the doctor, whom she does admit to having deep feelings for. But, you know, this is an old-fashioned formal class. And then, as now, that kind of act of marital infidelity, not something she can really contemplate. And yet, you will her, or at least I do, to break out from her conformity. And it's an inner conformity as much as an external one. There's a wish in her to be obedient, to do the right thing, even in her attempts to match Sonia or find out from Astrov by some calculation his real feelings for Sonia. Her own, Sonia's feelings for Astrov are very clear, but, you know, and it all backfires again. You know, again, that's part of Chekhov's comedy routine. You know, human being undertakes some of the best intentions and it all backfires. As they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And Chekhov illustrates that saying, I think, very well in so many ways. So, yeah, I think it's inner slavery he is interested in, but I don't know whether he has much hope necessarily that people will break out from their chains. Certainly no change of political system is going to do it. Otherwise, because that's never really talked about in his plays. He doesn't suggest that there'll be a new dawn with the revolution or something. It's not propagandist in that way at all. It's an inner life he's interested in. And I think as an actor as well, it makes him supremely challenging and invigorating to act, because you're not going to get, as an actor, the situation from the lines or the set or the costumes. You're going to have to come on with your history in the way that you and I have met today for the first time. You know, we've come from whatever day we've come from. You know, nothing about your life and outside what we're experiencing together now, and yet you could have come from the most, I hope isn't true, the most awful tragedy, and yet you are not, you know, wailing and weeping and gnashing your teeth. You're doing what all human beings do, which is get on with the next thing. That's quite difficult to act, I think.
Hugely,
because we actors want to show things, don't we? You know, we want to show us being, but you put it very well. You were saying earlier, you know, about the comedy of it is that, could it get any worse? We don't fall about, you know, raging and gnashing our teeth. Sometimes we do, but you know, it's unusual.
I think I think that actually ties very nicely into one of Chekhov's, actually, if you further down his family tree, and his I think I'm gonna get this wrong again. His cousin, is it not cousin, his nephew, is it Michael Chekhov? Michael Chekhov was his nephew.
That's right.
Just to preface this, actually, the month that I was at GSA, we opened up our first session on, we had a whole module on Michael Chekhov, actually, and I'll talk a bit more about his process in just a second. But our teacher who ran it sort of opened up by saying, okay, what does anybody know about Chekhov already? Just Chekhov, not Michael, not Anton, just Chekhov. And I said, yeah, I know about Chekhov. Yeah, I loved Uncle Vanya. I went on, I did this big spiel about the family, the tensions, the history, blah, 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 all this stuff. And then at the end of it, she went, yeah, okay, that's very nice, but I was actually talking about Michael Chekhov. And I was just like, oh, for goodness sake.
That's a very Chekhovian moment now, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very fitting, very fitting.
Very fitting, yeah.
And I remember sat there thinking, oh God, I feel stupid now. A bit like what I felt today, just to get my facts wrong. But yeah, but specifically for anyone listening who's not aware of Michael Chekhov and his acting process, he was a practitioner who did most of his work in Moscow, and his philosophy. I mean, there's countless books written about it, but I think at its heart is of course, I don't know if you've done this yourself, Simon, but his philosophy is about the inner journey, and that's the same about Chekhov as well, about Anton Chekhov, where he talks about, it's funny how in most of his plays like The Seagull, Uncle Vanya, and The Cherry Orchard, all the significant events seem to happen off stage. And then what you do see is the repercussions or the build up to something that's going to happen. So with Michael Chekhov, he has two ways of working. There's you sort of identify with your inner artistic center, which is where the solar plexus is in your body. And he asks you to play a scene, and your inner world either contracts, whether you're trying to hide a piece of bad news or not show any emotion or react to anything, or you can expand. Expand, not that's probably the wrong word, but you can either contract or expand, and you let them see everything. And of course, as an actor, you don't overact it, but you feel it on the inside, and then you burst it out there from your soul, from your core of your body, and you let it vibrate out into the world. And there's two different ways of working there. So I think it's fair to say that there seemed to be a trend in the Chekhov theatre gene in their family, in a way that it was all about the inner experience. Don't show it as such, feel it, and then what you want to get will follow shortly afterwards. I mean, did you get that sort of feeling when you did Chekhov at GSA?
Well, I mean, I'm going back a few years now, and I think we possibly the training system has changed, as all training systems do. And I didn't really come across Michael Chekhov at all as a man of the theatre, director, and actor until later, after I'd left GSA. But I was aware of his work in name only, really. But of course, he was one of Stanislavski's most gifted students, wasn't he, in the Moscow Art Theatre, along with others too, like Bakhtangov and Meyerhold. But he was, as you say, very, very different. I mean, I found that my very limited knowledge of it, and this is always through secondhand because I never obviously clearly studied with the man himself, but I found that whole emphasis on atmosphere quite useful, or to walk through an atmosphere with a feeling of ease, or with an experience of tension in my heart. It's a very direct and accessible way of experiencing emotional life, because of course, if you put your body in a certain position, you're going to experience the concomitant feelings that arise out of that sense of contraction. I mean, I'm doing it now, you can't perhaps, but I mean, if I'm just constricted like this, I've already got a feeling of a sense of impending doom in my stomach, and it starts to make me look around either side, and and rock on my haunches like as I am doing now. I'm not thinking about doing that. It just comes as a result of putting my body in a certain position, and I think that was my understanding of that way of looking at acting. I mean, it's one of many ways in, isn't it? I mean, he was a remarkable actor. I mean, you can see him in that Hitchcock film Spellbound, where he plays a doctor in that, I think. And his work's remarkable for its detail. I think also he taught in Hollywood, didn't he, for quite a few years, and I think he had some quite interesting students, the likes of Jack Palance, even Marilyn Monroe and Yul Brynner, and people like that came to him, and he was able to help them even on screen, you know. And he I think was initially quite resistant to the whole notion of screen acting, but I think he learned to love it. As he kind of said, it's acting in parts, it's acting in bits. You learn to act in bits, and you do that, you polish that bit really clearly and carefully, and then the next bit comes along. You know, it's like a glass. He said, a glass of water. You pick up the glass. It's the first bit. Second, raise it to your lips. Third bit, you drink it. And you know, it's the fullness with which you do each of those things that, when put together on film, can lead to a very deep experience, I think, for the viewer. But no, I think he's a fascinating man. He had his troubles, didn't he? He was an alcoholic. He suffered acutely from depression. But he had a training school here, which I don't think exists anymore. Is it Dartington Hall? I think.
So.
Before the Second World War, he ran a studio here in England.
Yeah.
And that's how we kind of have come to the Stanislavski teaching, I suppose, indirectly through Michael Chekhov, because he actually taught here before the war, you know.
Yeah, well, it's something about there seems to be like a good correlation in the family about how the ability to sort of to feel it on the inside, and then that feeling of ease, that was the thing I missed out. To go through every moment, because when we're on stage, you know, there's particularly I think in our early years of just sort of discovering acting and discovering theatre, we feel like we have to like give it everything, like give it loads of effort and really show people like we're happy or we're sad, you know. But in fact, that looks really unrealistic and fake. I mean, even though acting is essentially telling stories that didn't happen to us, but you want to tell it you want to make it real. You want to make it as real as possible. But it's fascinating to hear how, you know, we go through our lives not worried about what our face looks like. We don't know what face we're putting. Obviously, we've just feel it on the inside, and as a result, I suppose we've all had that moment where we had just either a feeling of joy and we look at another person, or we have a feeling of absolute dread and like, I hate you, and we look at that other person. But people can see it, and even though we're not saying anything, even though we're not doing anything, it's visible. It's visible because our inner reality reflects the outer reality, I think, as one of the Greeks said. I can't remember which one, but something along those lines. So kind of that brings me on to about process, really, about Chekhov. I mean, I'm sorry to ask you again to sort of delve back to your early days of Chekhov.
No, go for it.
or your experiences since then, of course. But again, there seems to be, with British productions, there seems to be a very slow, kind of turgid pace to Chekhov, and when you go to Russia, it's freer, and it's got pace, and it's more real, essentially. I hope just bear with me. I mean, there was a great review that was published in The Guardian, actually, back in January of last year, and it goes, and particularly with Conor McPherson's version, it says it really applauds how it didn't stick to the original kind of, you know, the trend of Britishness of being very slow and turgid, but it actually moved forward. So it is a little wordy, so just bear with me. I won't take up too long. He says, The Guardian said, Conor McPherson's adaptation is perfectly weighted, does not radically reinvent or revolutionize Chekhov's 19th century story. It returns us to the great mournful spirit of Chekhov's tale about unrequited love, aging, and disappointment in middle age, while giving us a slicker modern beat. McPherson's script has a stripped, vivid simplicity, which quickens the pace of the drama. Every character is fully realized, including the ancillary roles that bring more comic relief, and to finish, it says a perfect tragic comedy. So, what would you say about the pace of Chekhov and the process of getting to know the material and performing it, essentially?
Well, I mean, there's one's experience as a viewer, and there's experience of teaching or directing, and they're obviously very different. I find as a viewer, I found as a viewer that production had, in conjunction with other ones I've seen of that play in English done in England, a great deal more lightness and humour about it than I'd seen previously. I think, as I said earlier, that English productions of Chekhov have been weighed down possibly by an overdue reverence and respect for the great Russian master, and have attempted to kind of replicate a rather ponderous rhythm. And I think that's quite clearly born out of an attempt to be Russian, which we can't be. It's absurd. And I like the Inrixon one, in the sense that it from the point of view that it didn't attempt to update or reroute it or set it in another environment, which is nothing wrong with that, but it just presents a whole other series of difficulties, I think. So I think that production really represented, a step forward, possibly, but what is a Chekhov? You can't really say definitively what an ideal Chekhov production is, because it's going to be seen through the eyes of that culture at that time with those people. I think in terms of playing him, and this is only my experience, I've tried to encourage actors I'm working with to really have a very full understanding of the emotional history of the characters they're playing. And so we do spend quite some considerable time, even on Zoom we found a way of improvising situations, events that are referred to in the play but are not directly experienced by the characters during the course of the play's events. Because I think that lends a history and a weight to whatever's going on. Just as you and I don't have to think about our personal history, we know it. And acting is supremely an act of knowing and not showing, isn't it? And I think Chekhov was written for that kind of style of way of looking at life and acting. Realism, I suppose, is what I'm talking about. And I don't mean realism in the narrow sense of keeping it real, because I think people are quite confused about the difference between reality and realism. They're very different things. I mean, realism is a selection of details, heightened and put together in such a way as to give you the illusion that you're watching reality. But reality, we all know, can be quite boring. And in Chekhov's world, of course, he's very gifted at giving you an illusion of reality, but it's a very heightened selection of details which come together to create that. So I'm probably rambling a bit here, but I find that also with actors, it's very easy as an actor to pick up somebody else's rhythm and tempo. Before you know where you are, you've both fallen into each other's tempo. And some characters have a very quick, light, soft tempo, and some have which is very different to one's own, and some have a tempo which is slower and more plodding, perhaps. And I think you have to kind of figure that out for yourself as an actor when you're tackling, well, any character really, but certainly in Chekhov, because it's very easy for it to become that kind of you can fall into a very introspective or plodding way of doing it. And it's a problem with a writer, I think, where so much is not on the page. Unlike, say, Shakespeare and Shaw, where you've got to act on the line and through the line, Chekhov is very different. And unless you're very clear about your inner life and your inner obstacles and so on, you can just end up playing the straight lines, and they're not very interesting. Anyway, they're all in translation, aren't they? Conor McPherson's worked from presumably a work, I don't know if he has, but maybe you can correct me on that, but a work from a Russian translation, word for word, Russian to English, and then he's made an adaptation of that, unless he speaks Russian, I don't know. But most of us English folks, we are dealing with the play at several removes, so how far we are from the source is going to be determined by the nature of the adaptation and the translation that's being used.
That's so interesting. Well, this has been a really insightful conversation. This has been really good to actually touch on the rhythm and like the process and everything else, and also the history as well. So it's so interesting. I think just before we come to a close here today, just a couple of I'd say quick fire questions, but I'm sure you can go to as much detail as you please. So this is sort of number one, really. So I'd say similar to other playwrights and how they comment on social political events. In your opinion, what distinguishes Chekhov from the rest of them? What gives him that unique edge when writing a play within a specific political landscape? Not saying he's talking about a political event as such, but what do you think separates him from the rest, if that makes sense?
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, forgive me, but the thing that comes to my mind is that he doesn't really have an agenda. He's not after the middle classes like Ibsen is, for example. He's not avowing some huge society change, like possibly maybe Shaw might be, or Gorky. He doesn't seem to have a direct or overt agenda, unless it's an inner one. I think finally he just says, people don't change very much. If you can salvage some beauty along the way, it's better than nothing. You got to make the effort though to make your life better. It's an individual thing.
Fascinating. And then just to finish, I suppose we're taking a very hypothetical view with this last question, really. But say if Chekhov was alive today and he saw I remember we talked about at the top of the show today, was the fact that he saw everyone being forcefully locked in, everyone being pushed together, and just we couldn't go anywhere, we couldn't go outside. And in these modern times compared to at the time he was writing in the late 1890s, do you think that this would be, I mean it's a very Chekhovian state if you think about it right now, but how would you think he would turn this, with this various media and everything, all this tragedy that seems to be around us right now, how do you think he would translate all this into comedy, into a tragic comedy, find the humor in such some people would say a tragic time that we're living through at the moment?
Well, this is going to sound a bit like the plot of Uncle Vanya, really, but I think because I've heard people have been forced to kind of compelled to share accommodation or not with people they wouldn't have been used to sharing with. And I think he'd have found the great humor in people's enforced isolation, and also enforced sharing within in unfamiliar surroundings. Not unlike Uncle Vanya, really. I don't know whether. Again, it's so hard to say, isn't it? Really, I don't think he's going to propose some revolutionary change, but I think he would have a great fun in orchestrating all the chaos and the mess that comes from an enforced period of living either alone or with people that you don't want to live with.
Yeah, he would look at the Zoom chats. That
will be in it as well. And there'll be a lot of comedy with cameras turned on or off, or connections failing, and and people coming back and trying to sort of rewrite what they'd written and that kind of thing. Yeah, I think there would be a lot of scope for that.
And then just people like trying to find it, especially if you've got a big family and then you've got like young kids, or I could just see a total kind of technological madness on the stage. I wouldn't be surprised if he just got a theater and it was just a screen and with all these various Zoom boxes and people just like freezing in one corner then disappearing in the other, like that.
That would be the modern Chekhovian experience, wouldn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, it sort of reminds me a bit of Staged, that show that came out on the BBC with David Tennant and Michael Sheen, that sort of state where we're all trying to communicate, but yet the outside world is locking us in from a socially and environmental view as well, which I think, he's very much alive, Chekhov.
He is.
His ideas are still are still with us, and I think that's what makes him one of the greatest.
Very much. I mean, that thing about the environment, sorry, very briefly, but importantly, I mean, that's one of those celebrated moments in Uncle Vanya, where Astrov talks about his love for the environment.
Yeah.
When he takes Uncle Vanya on and says, look, why do you burn wood, burn peat in your stoves? You know, why should I do that? Vanya says. And then he has this long speech about you know, the importance of living close to the environment and keeping it in your heart, and knowing that actually planting a tree and watching it grow is so important and significant, and we should do all in our power to preserve that life. That couldn't be more topical. I could hear David Attenborough saying something like that, you know. I mean, it will be almost a banner speech for Greenpeace or any of one of the many environmental groups and organizations that are around. So as you say, Oliver, he is extremely modern. Yeah,
fantastic. I think that's why he will stand the test of time, like with Shakespeare, with Ibsen, with Pinter, with Beckett. He's up there with the greats, and long may his reputation and his work be celebrated. So,
yeah, I agree.
Cool. So just before I let you go today, Simon, I'm gonna stop the recording now, so I can say goodbye to you properly to make sure no technical difficulties or anything. But for our listeners and viewers today, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe to my channel on YouTube, Oliver Gower, or subscribe to the Uncensored Critic. You'll find it on Spotify, on Apple, whichever platform you're listening to right now. Give me a follow. That would be amazing. And Simon, you're doing more work with in fact, I should say I discovered you through Charlie at Running It Shouting.
Oh yes.
And so Simon runs a good sessions there on Uncle Vanya, and of course other Chekhov speeches as well. You got many others coming up with Charlie?
Well, I mean, I'm always tinkering around with that play Uncle Vanya in particular, and yeah, I may well resume my sessions. I'm taking a little recess right now with Uncle Vanya on Run It Shouting, but I'd like to do more, and possibly other plays too. I mean, I've been looking again at the Cherry Orchard recently, and that's something of a high watermark, I think, in dramatic writing, isn't it? I'm told. I think it was David Hare was talking about this. So I you know, every writer hopes to write a play as good as the Cherry Orchard. You know, that's what keeps me writing. He said something, you know, write a play. So yeah, I mean, there's so much to investigate, so many plays, so little time. But I hope to do more Run It Shouting, and yeah, I think there's a production coming up soon actually of Uncle Vanya at the Chiswick Playhouse that's being mooted. So we'll see. You know, as you say, his name and reputation are alive and well. So
long may it continue. Simon, thank you so much for this. This has been extremely informative, and I've learned so much. I hope, despite my facts being a little off at some point,
no worries. No,
it's been. I hope I've made sense, and
absolutely.
And yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Too. Thanks so much. Thanks, Oliver.
Take care.
Okay. Bye bye.